Welcome, everybody, to the Business Podcast, where we pour out weekly business lessons week after week after week. I'm here with the amazing Emily Prokop. Give it up for Emily.
Hi. Thanks for clapping in your home studios. Okay.
I'm clapping. I forgot to clap. I was supposed to be clapping.
Okay.
I totally. There's a really good reverb here, isn't there? Like,
It's
I feel like I
lovely.
can hear like
So
I feel like I have a
lovely.
monitor in front of my face here.
It's a podcaster's dream.
It is a podcaster's dream. So, Emily, you have a brand new book. First off, we're here at DC Podfest.
Yes.
Shout out to Jennifer Crawford, who's been a guest on the show, and hopefully I'll be able to get some time to chat with her today before I head back to Jersey.
Yeah.
You have a brand new book
Yeah.
that just came out called The Story
The story behind, yeah.
based
Here it is.
on your podcast.
Here it is, yeah.
So, first off, why don't you give some background about yourself, and then we'll get into the podcast, and then we'll get into the book. Does that sound like a good transition?
Yeah.
Awesome. And we'll relate it back to business, because I know this is the business podcast, but I know that there's story to be told
Well,
here.
because clearly the money is in podcasting and also writing books.
Obviously, that's why there's so many people here at DC Podfest.
Yeah. Yeah, so I started The Story Behind about 2 years ago. It's a history podcast. It's 5 to 10 minutes about the history of everyday objects. So the paperclip, food seems to be a very popular subject that people love learning about. And I was reached out to by a publisher about 14 months into doing my podcast, and they said, you know, your 5 to 10 minute episodes, they're scripted. They'd be perfect for chapters of a book. Have you thought about writing a book? Can we talk to you? Can we talk you into writing a book about based on your podcast? And what they came to me with was you already have the content and you've already started building an audience. So that's what they really liked about reaching
Yeah, they don't
out
have to do any of the marketing.
They did a lot of marketing. They helped
Did
me
they?
a lot with marketing.
Oh, wait, I forgot we're on camera.
Oh,
Yes, of course
yes.
they did. They did lots of marketing to
No,
help.
they did. It was
I mean,
kind
that's
of
the horror
amazing.
story I always hear from people that are like, oh, I could get a publisher, but they don't do as much as they did 10 years or 15 years ago.
No, well, the thing was they have a lot of skin in the game as well. So they were a publisher who didn't give me an advance. All
Ouch.
of the money is based on sales. I get a higher percentage of royalties from the book itself. So it's almost like how we might sell T-shirts as podcasters through something like TeePublic, where we don't put up upfront costs, but we get a little bit back
Right,
from
right.
it.
So the podcast. So why the story behind?
Because of ADHD. And that was me. I'd be at work and I don't want to do my work. And actually, this is the story behind. The story behind was I was sitting there and I had a craving. I was pregnant at the time. I had a craving for pink lemonade. Went and got my pink lemonade, came back from my lunch hour, and I'm like, why is it pink? And they had a picture of a pink lemon, and I'm like, is that a
I
thing?
think that's a thing that's like, isn't it like going bad?
Yeah.
Like once it's
yeah, like the picture. I'm like, or do they make
it's
pink
past-
lemons? And it wasn't raspberry lemonade. It wasn't anything like that. And I ended up looking up the story behind it. And there was there were two different stories. I'll try to make them short. Both came from the circus. One was a performer was washing his red tights and made the water pink. And the guy selling lemonade was out of water and used that water. And it became pink lemonade. Kind of gross. And the other one was a bunch of cinnamon candies fell into the lemonade and made it pink, and people loved it. And I heard this story, I read this story online, and I'm like, I have nobody to tell about this. And I'm looking around my coworkers, and they're used to like, hey, did you guys know this? I'm like, I can't do that again. And at the time, I had come off my other podcast that I did, and that was over my co-host, and I had a falling out a bit. And I had other podcasters who were like, come back, we miss you. We want you to come podcast again. And I texted one of them, and I'm like, do you think this would make a good podcast if I did the story behind objects? And it was like, and the name was even right there in the text. I'm like, the story behind. And it just sort of fell into place. And it was nice that I already had a podcast that I tested and retested a bunch of different things and found out what failed, what worked. And so it was nice to just go right into it.
That is awesome. And and you have your own business as far as
Yeah.
editing podcasts yourself.
Yeah.
So I told you we were going to get back in the business, the business
business.
mindset here. So, walk me through some of the background behind that and how you felt like, hey, staring at audio WAV files is a thing that I want to do.
That was the funny thing that I remember from first getting into podcasting is I loved learning all that technical stuff, and I would go into Facebook groups and see people complaining, I hate editing, and I'd be like, am I this rare unicorn that actually likes this? I mean, I'd be sitting there playing with the effects, trying to make things better, being like, oh, I could do this, I could tweak this a little bit, and just sitting there, just click, click, click. And I started doing it on the side. If you've talked to Steve Stewart, he helped.
Love that guy.
He's wonderful. He had a course for podcast editors, for podcast editing as a business, and I took that. And after that, he kind of introduced me to some clients, and I was doing that on the side. Then I found out I was going to get laid off at the end of the year, and I was like, wow, I gotta kick this into gear. My husband's like, if you don't go after podcasting, I'm going to be so mad at you because you've not wasted, but you've spent so much time learning how to podcast, learning the business, even though this is quote unquote your hobby, but you're so invested in it. Like, why don't you just go freelance? What are you going to do? You're going to go to another job where you're podcasting on the side, and you're going to be miserable because you're going to be thinking about podcasting all day. And I was like, all right, we'll try this. We'll try this for a little while. And turns out all those people who hated podcast editing were just like, oh, you're going to be doing that now? Okay, I want to be your client. And for the past, I think, 5 months, I've had this banner on my website. Like, I'm not accepting new clients. I can't. I have no time anymore.
I think that is great that you saw that market, the niche, the fact that people hated editing.
Yeah.
I didn't hate editing, so I could be part of that unicorn party. But I have stopped editing in the last 2 years mostly because of time, and because just to take 80 minutes to edit a 40-minute show down to to take 2 minutes off of that 40 minutes, to me, it's just like, wow, that's a really big waste of time.
Well, it was nice that when I was first starting out and running a business, and I knew nothing about starting a business. Steve Stewart helped me so much with, like, what do I do with taxes? What do I do with this? And he's walking me through this. And then I also got
I know he wants to get to MapCon next year.
Yes,
you're on notice, Steve.
I think he was supposed to come this year, too.
He was. There was a thing that happened or something.
Yeah. He got me started with a lot of the financial stuff, but I also wanted to know marketing, how to market, and I also didn't want to be out there and there's this thing that happens in podcast groups where people will say, I'm looking for a podcast editor, and the editors come out, and like seagulls on a French fry, just, oh, I'm an editor, I'm going to DM you, and I'm like, I can't do that. I don't feel comfortable doing that or jumping into that. So the cool thing was I just started putting myself out there on social media, and I'm like, on my Instagram, hey, I'm editing. This is me editing. Here's my cat. Here's my family. And it ended up, I started getting clients who were just like me. They're like, I also like cats. You do podcast editing? You do podcast consulting? I'd love to talk to you about this. And we would get on Skype calls, or we'd get on the phone, and we'd already have this sort of rapport because we knew that we had things in common. It wasn't just like, I want to edit your podcast and I don't care what it's about. And I would talk to them. And if their podcast interests me, because that was another thing I wanted, my first question to people is, what's your podcast about? And when I hear them talk about it passionately, and I realize, it's not something that I'm going to fall asleep to, or it's not something that, because you got to remember, you're going to be sitting there for 4 hours working on a podcast at least.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And that's how I have amazing clients, too, that I look forward to editing their podcasts. Weirdly enough, I have 2 financial podcast clients. And I've learned so much. We got to pay off my husband's college loans.
Wow.
Because I was editing their podcast. And I was like, we need to do this, and we need to do this. And like, trust me, Jamila told me to do this, and we're going to do it.
That is awesome. So
Yeah.
what's been the biggest roadblock for you on this journey?
Having to pull out the extrovert side, because I'm very introverted. I'm very much like, I get my energy from being alone, and sometimes after something like this, I love it so much, but then I have to go home and stare at a wall for about a day. That's kind of the hardest thing, because you always want to be on to, and you always want to be putting out content, and sometimes it's like a trudge to be like, I haven't tweeted in a while. What am I going to say? And I'm also of the mind, like, if you have nothing to say and if you're pushing it, it's not going to be great. But I haven't really seen any downside to taking some time off if you need it. Like, I needed to right before the book came out, because I was terrified. I had terrible imposter syndrome, and I just had to tell people, I'm like, look, I need to take a break from social media. I know I should be on. Like right now, my book is releasing, and I can't be on. Posts will be scheduled. If you email me, I will email you back, but I'm not going to be like every hour, hey, by the way, I have a book, because at that point, I was not comfortable doing that. That's kind of been a big roadblock.
That
for
is
me.
a difficult. I mean, I've released 4 books,
Yeah.
and it's tough because I don't want people to feel like I'm just trying to shell something into their face about like
Yeah.
how they need to spend money to buy my
I
book. Buy, like
know.
the what's his name? John Lovitz. Buy my book. Buy my book. Buy my book. You know, it's tough to find that balance. And it's very helpful, I would imagine, to have a team of people that are going to help you market it,
Yes.
and do some of that marketing, I guess.
Well,
is
they
a-
did some of the schmoozing for me. So they have, my publisher is Mango Publishing. They have people all over the world, and they were saying, you know, email us things like what your podcast is on this week. Email what other podcasts you're going to be on, because we can take that and help sell your book to people. And weirdly enough, apparently Europe loves trivia. So they're just like, we just say it's a trivia book in Europe, and they're just like, yeah, we want it. Because apparently bar trivia is huge there, so they love it. But I think another great thing was that I already had the audience, and they were already a very engaged audience. That, you know, the small percentage who are very engaged are really engaged. And it was cool getting their pictures, and I'd be like, hey, send me a picture when the book comes out of you holding the book. Can I repost it? And I would repost it. I mean, there's my content right there. I don't have to come up with anything. They're doing this, and they think it's so cool that I'm reposting it. And I'm like, you guys are helping me more than I'm doing anything for you. Thank
don't
you.
don't let them know that too
I
much.
Yeah.
So okay, so what's one thing that you've learned business wise from doing the book, like in the process of getting this book together, that you feel that you've been able to accomplish or learn more, you know, better yourself through by taking the time to write a book?
I think it's trusting yourself, and that's a big thing. The imposter syndrome, that little voice in your head that's like, you can't do. Who are you to write this words? I had 3 days before my deadline, I went upstairs to my husband, and I'm just crying and saying, all of my words are stupid. They're just all stupid. It's terrible. And he's just like, no. You were reached out to because they knew that your content could appeal to people. You've already had people listen to your podcast, and they've told you, go look at your reviews. What are you doing? Where is this voice coming from? Have you actually heard this from anybody? And I'm like, no. And he's like, even your 1-star reviews? I'm like, no. He's like, yeah, this is you. This is the bad side of you. Tell her to shut up.
So, Emily, where can people find you online and get your book, The Story Behind, which is all about the extraordinary history behind ordinary objects that I'm totally reading off the cover?
It's fine. It's a mouthful for me, too. I have to get, actually, Jessica Kupperman's over there.
She is right over there.
She is the best.
Previous guest, Jessica Kupperman.
Yes, she is the best at elevator pitches. I need to, if you're...
Sounded like that's what she was talking about over there.
She's so good. She's so amazing. I have to have her like do my elevator pitch for me. But I am at thestorybehindpodcast.com. You can find links to my book, so you can order it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and my favorite store of all time, Target, has it. I can't believe that.
Target has it? Like,
Target, yes.
like all the Targets?
No, not. I don't even know if it's in the store. Actually, one of my listeners found my book in a bookstore and took a picture, and I was like, what bookstore is this? She's like, it's a small indie bookstore in my town. And I'm like, that is the best, that you could just find it in bookstores.
That is incredible.
Yeah.
That is incredible.
Yeah.
Well, Emily, thank you so much for taking the time here at DC Podfest to chat, and congratulations on the book again.
Thank
It's
you.
The Story Behind.
Yep.
It'll probably be out of focus unless I cover my face, but it'll jump to her face. So
It's
the story. It's The Story Behind.
Yes.
And you can get it at apparently local bookstores
Apparently.
across the country, Amazon, Target,
Yeah.
and more. Thank you again so much for taking the time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
You are very welcome. All right, and this episode has been brought to you by me. And if you want to learn about growing your business, go to superjoepardo.com and click on the Work with Joe button at the top, and we can get started on working on growing your business through the top. That stands for team, offer, and process.
Ooh.
Everybody have an amazing. Oh yeah, right. Like, ooh. Everybody, I hope you have an amazing week, and I'll talk to you next Tuesday.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of The Business Podcast featuring Super Joe Pardo. Get more business content at superjoepardo.com. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest on The Business Podcast, send an email to joe@superjoepardo.com. The Business Podcast is copyrighted to 234 Solutions, LLC.